So many people don't even know they can do a depreciation schedule, and
It breaks our heart. It's so sad. In the early days, the majority of people had no idea about depreciation. A lot of accountants weren't really covering it off because they didn't have people like us that they could turn to. They don't know about depreciation.
so people are leaving a lot of money on the table by not doing depreciation.
Yeah, absolutely. We get a lot of people coming to us every year and they say, I've had this property for 5 years and my accountant's never claimed depreciation.
30%, your average tax rate, you're getting back $2,000 per annum really from the tax man.
Every year. It's important purely for cash flow.
Welcome to the Property Addicts Australia podcast. We are interviewing Scott Brunsdon, co-founder of Depreciator, depreciator.com.au. Scott has been around in the industry for a long time, and Depreciator are one of the companies who first started doing depreciation schedules for property investors as a key service. So Scott, welcome to Property Addicts Australia.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Scott, it's great to have you here. We've known you for a very, very long time, but for our audience, share a bit about your background and how it all started. How did you get into providing depreciation services?
Sure. So my background is in marketing. And we founded this business, over 20 years ago, 22, 23 years ago. My hair wasn't grey then. And we've been going for such a long time. So, we know depreciation inside out. Depreciation.
And how did you get into that? What were you doing?
Because when we, 22, 23 years ago, there weren't really many people doing this sort of thing in the property industry. There were some quantity surveying firms that dabbled a bit in tax, and it was a time when there were lots of seminars happening. And one of those seminar providers talked about depreciation and, how important it was for cash flow. And we just felt there was a business there. So we started a business that only did depreciation. That's all we did. That's all we've ever done, just depreciation. And there's other people that have dabbled in other parts of quantity surveying and other parts of property, but we've just stuck to depreciation for over 20 years.
And were you investing in property? Is that how you got in?
So I've had property investments for a while. It's funny. The very first rental property I had was a terrace house that I did a renovation on. And my accountant said, when I rented it out, my accountant said, you should get a depreciation schedule. I had no idea what he was talking about. I said, okay. And I remember it cost me $1,000. And that was in the mid-90s. And, but I had no idea what it was. And I did it. And it was fantastic. And it paid itself off, manyfold. So that was my sort of early accidental experience with depreciation.
And what triggered the thought that you should follow this direction and help other investors?
I think just because I was investing and I knew other people doing it and nobody was covering off depreciation and more people were talking about it. It's hard to imagine back then that the internet really wasn't talking about depreciation and Facebook wasn't around, I don't think. And if people wanted to learn about property, they really had to go to a bookshop. It's so old fashioned. They had to go to a bookshop and go to the aisle or the shelf with property investing books. And in one of those books, there might be a chapter on depreciation. And there was a thirst for knowledge out there that wasn't really being satisfied by the internet or by bookshops. And accountants also needed a provider who could help them and their clients claim depreciation. So they loved it when we popped up. When we went to accountants and said, hey, we're just doing tax, we're just doing depreciation. They said, that's fantastic. And some of those accountants have been with us for 22 years.
So in terms of learning about depreciation and, you mentioned that you were in marketing. So how did you transition into this world, or did you have an accountant form part of the business to help you out?
No, not really. It was quite difficult. So, we had to educate ourselves on depreciation. There wasn't a lot of material around. There's loads, of course, on the ATO side. But helpfully what the ATO have done over the last few years is put out a very good annual publication, which is written for mums and dads. It's written in a language that everybody can understand. So there's good information there. But we had to ask accountants. We talked to the ATO. We asked property investors. We asked all sorts of people to build up, our knowledge. And then we wrote an ebook some time ago that's available on our website. And it's written in a question and answer format, and it covers lots of material about depreciation. So the knowledge is now there. A lot of it contributed by us, but people are now much, much better informed than they were when we started the business.
Great. I guess as we go through our various questions today, we'll go through how it's evolved over the years because, you started 22 years ago and laws have changed. But before we go down that path, I'm curious about if you could talk about depreciation. What does it mean for a property investor? Is it important?
Yeah, it's important purely for cash flow. It provides cash flow for property investors, and um, the best way to explain it is that depreciation is basically something that businesses use. So if you've got a trucking business, you depreciate your trucks. If you're a tradesman, you depreciate your tools. They're all things that you use in a business to earn income. Businesses depreciate their furniture and their computers. If you're a property investor, you're running a business. So you have money coming in, which is the rent, and you declare it and you pay tax on it. And then you've got your outgoings. So your outgoings are council rates and water rates and property management fees and repairs. And depreciation is just another outgoing. So that's where it fits in the puzzle. And it's compensation for wear and tear. So a business depreciates its trucks because the trucks suffer wear and tear. Tradesman depreciates their tools because they suffer wear and tear. A property investor depreciates their property because it suffers wear and tear. So it's compensation for that wear and tear. But the great thing about depreciation as a tax deduction is it's a non-cash tax deduction, because when you pay your council rates during the year and you do your tax return at the end of the year, you then try and claw some money back. And you pay your property manager 7% per year, and when you do your tax return, you try and get some of that back. With depreciation, when you bought the property, you're locked in the entitlement. And the deduction for depreciation is just sitting on the table, and all you do every year is go and pick it up. So you're not outlaying money every year to pick up that deduction. So that's why it's really good for cash flow. And even on a modest property, there can be thousands of dollars sitting on the table.
But so many people don't even know they can do a depreciation schedule and
I
probably
know.
read them every day.
It breaks our heart. It's so sad. There are many people who don't know. In the early days, the majority of people had no idea about depreciation. And a lot of accountants weren't really covering it off because they didn't have people like us that they could turn to. But there are still people who don't cover off depreciation. And I guess they fall into two camps. One camp is the people who do their own tax return. They've always done their own tax. They earn a salary. Their tax is really simple. They have one investment property around the corner. They've always done their own tax. They keep doing it. They don't know about depreciation. They know about claiming interest payments. They know about claiming council rates because they're things that they pay out. They don't know about depreciation.
So people are leaving a lot of money on the table by not doing depreciation.
Yeah. And we get a lot of people coming to us every year and they say, I've had this property for 5 years and my accountant's never claimed depreciation, or I've been doing my own tax and I've just gone to an accountant and the accountant said, why aren't you claiming depreciation? So people come to us often retrospectively when somebody tells them about depreciation. They tell them about the deduction that they've missed out on.
So even the accountants don't know in many cases.
Sometimes, yeah. There's most accountants are fabulous, and to be fair to accountants, it's a terribly difficult job, and accountants, a lot of them are generalists, and they have to know a lot. The accounting world is so broad, and there's so much they need to know, and it changes so much all the time. We play in this very narrow area of tax called depreciation, and we know it very, very deep, but it's not very broad. So we know more about depreciation than most accountants, but accountants know more about us when it comes to absolutely everything else.
So then talking about what does depreciation actually involve? So if you look at a property, like a house or an apartment or a townhouse, what are we actually looking at depreciating?
We're looking at the building. So if we're talking about, let's just talk about secondhand properties. Any residential property that was built after September 1987, the building can be written off, can be depreciated. And it depreciates at 2.5%. So let's say somebody buys a house or an apartment and it was built in 2005. So it was built 20 years ago. That building depreciates at 2.5% per annum every year. So over 40 years. So 20 years is gone, but there's still another 20 years of depreciation left on that building. So what we do when we do a depreciation schedule on that property is we'll work out what it cost to build 20 years ago, and then our client, if they're renting it out, they claim that cost at 2.5% per year every year. And the other big thing in depreciation is renovations. So if a property was built in the 1920s, it's a terrace house in Sydney, Melbourne or Brisbane, it would have been renovated sometime. And even if the renovations were done by a previous owner, the current owner can depreciate those renovations. So there's any properties built after 87, there's depreciation in them. Older properties, any renovations done can be depreciated.
So any building constructed prior to 87 cannot be depreciated.
No, if it's prior to 87 and if there's no renovations, there's no depreciation to claim in it. Unless the owner, our client, buys it and does a renovation. If they do a renovation, they get to claim that. So you claim your renovation, but you also get to claim a previous owner renovation if there's one there.
And what about all the fixtures and fittings inside the property? Is that included?
Anything brand new. There was a change to the rules in 2017. Budget night. It was a very dark day, or a very dark night, that one. A change to the rules blindsided us. And what happened was the change affected the claiming of assets. And when I say assets, I mean carpet, stove, hot water heater, air conditioning, that sort of stuff. What they said was that from that time, anything that was used or secondhand when somebody bought the property could not be depreciated. So the building wasn't touched at all. The building can still be depreciated. But if you buy a secondhand property and it has a 5-year-old oven in it, you can't depreciate that oven anymore. But if you put a new one in, you get to depreciate that.
But does that mean any schedules you did in the past for investors, are they invalid?
No. They would never do that because, gosh, imagine the uproar. Imagine the uproar if they came out and made a change and said, oh, every single depreciation schedule ever done is wrong. They wouldn't do that. So they have a date. They said, this starts on this date.
Yeah.
So what it meant was it did push some people toward brand new property, because if it's a brand new property, all of the assets in the property can be depreciated as well as the building. But a lot of people stuck with used property for all sorts of reasons that make sense, and those buildings can still be depreciated.
So then talking about brand new properties, sometimes or often, people get sold the idea of depreciation, and that's really the marketing speak, really. What's your view of that?
I sort of see depreciation as the icing on the cake. It's a fabulous thing. It's great for cash flow, but I don't think it should drive a purchase decision. And I know that there are people out there who sell properties based on the depreciation benefits, and often they're not fabulous properties and they're not in great locations. And sometimes we look at them and think, well, gosh, there's going to be no capital growth in that one. So I don't think it makes sense to chase depreciation as part of a buying decision. It's just a fabulous thing to help cash flow a property. And with brand new property, it can be higher in the early years, which is useful because that's when your costs are greater.
Well, from my limited knowledge, given Mona's a tax accountant by background, it is a timing benefit, right? Because when they come to selling that property, that depreciation will increase the tax you pay at the end.
There is an impost. There is a CGT impost on it, but it only covers depreciation claimed on the building, not on the assets. And if people have held a property for longer than 12 months, there's the CGT discount. So the actual CGT impost is fairly minor. And I think that's why so many accountants cover off. More than half the work we do is from accountants. We don't advertise to the general public. We get lots of our work from accountants, and they think it's important that they cover it off for their clients, mainly for cash flow purposes.
But what if the government removes depreciating buildings as well at some point, right? That's a risk.
Yeah, it'd be terribly disappointing.
Yeah, true.
No, if 2017 the budget was a dark night, if they did that and removed it altogether, that'd be a terribly dark night and a dark day following that.
Understandable. And Scott, you You guys were one of the first companies to do just depreciation schedules. So in a year, how many on average, how many depreciation schedules do you guys do?
Oh, look, it varies. We have bigger years and smaller years. It's probably 4 to 5,000.
Wow.
Um, it's a lot. We do a lot of depreciation schedules.
Should everyone do one?
Not necessarily, but everybody should find out if there's depreciation in that property to claim. And we're a little bit different from a lot of companies because if we don't think it's worth doing, we'll tell people. We'll say, to be honest, there's not really enough depreciation here for you to go through this exercise. Don't worry about it. But in probably 9 cases out of 10, whoever answers the phone at Depreciator can look at a property online if there's photographs online and say to a client, look, we think there's going to be 2,000 per year to claim here or 4,000 per year to claim here. So it's a mistake not to make the inquiry, not to find out if there's stuff in the property.
So is there a particular time during the year? I know probably tax time's the busiest time for you, but can people do just at any time?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Tax time's nuts. Anzac Day, it's like a tap gets turned on, and we get terribly busy in May and June. And a lot of that is people who we might have been speaking to for 10 months who've just been putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And then June hits and they think, oh, geez, I've got to do that thing. And they get on the phone and they get it going. But it can be done. The jobs that come in January and February are fantastic because we've got plenty of time to talk and it's much more relaxed. Get frantic in June.
The quantity surveyor's fee that you get paid or depreciator gets paid would be tax deductible as well, I understand.
Yeah, the fee the clients pay us, that's 100% tax deductible, yes.
So it's good if someone's thinking about it and it's June, and even if you're not going to be doing your tax return for some time, then it's worthwhile still.
Well, that's why people hold off on doing it, because in February they think, I don't want to pay those guys money now because I can't claim it till legitimate tax. I'll do it. I'll pay them in June. So that's why they hold off till June.
So you mentioned that people can ring Depreciator up and even like your team can look at the photos and decide, okay, is it worth actually doing a schedule? I recall when we've done our schedules in the past, nobody needed to go to the properties either in those instances. And we had older properties, that is, and we had to just provide photos. So tell us, in what instances would someone go out to see a property versus just rely on photos?
There's one company that say, oh no, everybody needs to be inspected and it's going to cost you this much. It's not really the case. We will look at a property and there's some that we decide that, yes, we definitely want to inspect that property. It's a complicated property on a difficult site. There will be things that are not obvious. We want to go there. Or it could be a 100-year-old terrace house that's had a major renovation and they've pushed up into the roof and we want to go there because there will be things not obvious. But if somebody buys a 10-year-old project home with no renovations, it's not really necessary to visit the property to look at it and work out what depreciation might be in it. So we'll offer clients both options. Some clients particularly wants to inspect, and we're obviously happy to do that. Some clients call up and ask us straight up, can you do this without an inspection? And we'll look at what's online and make a determination as to whether we can or can't do it without an inspection.
Or if they have plans for you, right?
Yeah. I mean, we need to know how big the house is. We need to know enough about how the house was built. We need plenty of photographs. If there's 3 photographs online and no floor plan, can't do it. But often clients have more information, or often they've bought something through a buyer's agent, and goodness gracious, there's a lot of material from a buyer. There'll be videos and all sorts of stuff. So it gets down to what information is available to enable us to do it without an inspection. But sometimes we'll dig our heels and say, look, I think we should inspect this one.
So whether a property gets inspected or not impacts the cost potentially?
Yes, it does. Yes. It's obviously more expensive. If we send a quantity surveyor to a property and he has to drive for 40 minutes, it's more expensive. And our fee for inspection jobs is $715. Your clients get a discount. If we don't inspect, again, it depends on how simple the job is and how much information there is, but it could be $400 or $500.
And in terms of locations, do you cover capital cities,
Yeah,
regional?
we have we've got the capital cities covered, and we have a lot of the big regional centres covered. We're strong on the eastern seaboard, mainly because that's where people are buying rental properties. Southeast Queensland, we have people in Brisbane, Sunshine Coast, and Gold Coast because it's a massive population centre. And there's lots of stuff happening there. Sydney, obviously, Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth. So the major centres and also some of the regional centres.
And today, there's a number of companies that have popped up over the years, but Depreciator is one of the older ones. So talk us about, what's out there, what you're seeing versus what Depreciator offers.
Yeah, I suppose there's a benefit in longevity. We've seen everything. We've seen lots of companies come and go. Tax season is when depreciation schedule providers pop up and then they disappear after making mistakes sometimes. But a benefit of us being around for so long is that we have lots of clients that come back to us every year to have their schedules updated. We don't charge to do that. People come back to us and they say, "Oh, look, I've put a new oven in and new blinds last month, and
I should have come then.
you should have come."
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've got such good systems. It's terribly easy for us to open up an old schedule and throw in 3 new assets or a bathroom renovation and send out a brand new schedule to the accountant and to the client. And we do that all the time, every single day. Every single day, somebody comes to us to update a schedule. So that's a benefit in a company that's been around for a long time. So we've got, I don't know, well over 140,000 schedules that we update. We don't update all of them, thank goodness, but we update a lot of them periodically. Because we only do this, we're very good at it, and accountants know that we're good at it. That's why accountants send people to us. We've got some of our quantity surveyors, and we only use quantity surveyors. There's a couple of companies out there taking shortcuts and using valuers and unqualified people to just gather data. So they go to a property, they gather data, that goes back to head office, to a person, or perhaps just to Excel. We like the person that inspects the property to be the person that costs the building and values the assets. So we're a little bit different in that respect also.
And I'm curious, the houses versus apartments, like in terms of depreciation, what have you seen? Let's say a house and apartment the same age. How would you?
It's tricky because houses can be 150 square metre bungalow or a massive 3-story house somewhere. Apartments can be 3-story walk-ups, or they can be huge things with 400 or 500 apartments in them and common areas and gyms. Brand new apartments tend to throw off more depreciation than houses. Brand new apartments in big complexes. That's because when you buy an apartment, you also own part of the common area. You own part of the pool and the gym and the sauna and the barbecue area and the rooftop, whatever. You own part of that. So there can be a lot of depreciation in an apartment. And equally with those big apartments with a pool and a gym and a sauna and a rooftop, whatever, the strata fees can be huge. So
Yeah.
you've got to weigh that up as well. But one housing type that does throw off good depreciation if it's brand new is duplexes. So there are people, building duplexes, and the reason duplexes have strong depreciation if they're brand new is because there's 2 ovens and 2 range hood and 2 dishwashers and 2 multiple air conditioning units and 2 hot water heaters, and they're the things that depreciate quickly in the early years. Buildings 2.5% over 40 years, but all of the fixtures and fittings and the assets, they depreciate hard and fast over the first 4 or 5 years. So if you've got a house with lots of that stuff in it, there's good depreciation up front.
But if you're buying it as an established property, then you can't.
Correct. If it's secondhand.
But again, going back to your point that it's just an icing on the cake, it shouldn't be the driver for investing decisions. Yeah. And sorry, just backtracking a little bit, we're talking about how some companies may have shortcuts, whereas Depreciator is very focused on, getting the right value of the assets out and all. So let's talk about, like your competition or like pricings, because many people go out there and they are comparing 2 companies based on what price, right? What you are charging versus what they are charging. So what would you say to someone doing that?
Well, we're never going to be the cheapest company around. But equally, we're never going to be the most expensive. I think we have fair prices for what we do. Um, there are some companies that pop up and it's a terribly cheap online thing where nobody ever gets to actually talk to a person. They've got to do all the work themselves and they get something in their inbox. And if they query it, there's nobody they can speak to because there is no person. So they're the ones that do sort of pop up and disappear. But I think it's important to amortize, the cost. A depreciation schedule. I mean, if somebody buys a 10-year-old house, our depreciation schedule covers the next 30 years.
Mm.
So, it's not something that people have to do every year. So saving $100 on getting a document from a provider that may disappear, that may make a mistake. I mean, we do fix other people's schedules sometimes. It's just not worth saving $100. And the other thing that people don't realize is that when you commission a depreciation schedule and pay for it and get it and use it to complete your tax return, you're accepting responsibility for the accuracy of that depreciation schedule. If there's an audit, if you're questioned about the figures in the depreciation schedule, it's your problem because you paid for information. You then use that in your tax return. You signed off your tax return with your accountant. That's you accepting responsibility for the accuracy of it. So if there's a problem, it's down to you. It's not down to that provider who may or may not be around anymore. So I just think it's a bit of false economy to try and save $100 on something like this. And it's a little bit like people don't. Well, some people do, but a lot of people don't shop around for the absolute cheapest accountant they can find. They want a good accountant.
Or a lawyer or a doctor.
Yeah, all those things, or a hairdresser. Yes, shop around for the cheapest one.
Exactly. Let's put it this way, right? $700 ballpark over 20 years. It's $35 a year. And after tax, it's even probably half of it. Or let's try $1 a day to save thousands of dollars.
Yeah. And for your clients, it's $660. If we inspect, if we don't inspect, it's cheaper.
Right. And Scott, just moving on to some case studies and what you've seen, what's the biggest depreciation you've seen?
I knew you were going to ask this. So I asked the gang at work yesterday what they'd seen recently. And we have one person that sees all the schedules that go out. And we did one last week and it was $157,950 in depreciation in the first full year. That's one
First year.
First full year.
$150K.
$157,000. But that's not the average house. That's not a 3-bedroom bungalow in the suburbs. That was a terribly nice house. Our head quantity surveyor, he lives up at Lennox Head, poor man's Byron Bay, and he does a lot of depreciation, a lot of quantity surveying work up there, and he works on those $30, $40, $50 million houses. So if they're owned by companies, a lot of them are, or trusts, and they're rented out, there's massive depreciation in those. But we try not to talk about those outlandish figures because then people get terribly excited.
But I'm curious though, say $30, $40, $50 million houses. Is that how much it would cost to build those houses? All right. Okay. And that's why they can claim.
Yes. It's not, a lot of the houses being built in that little part of the world, Byron, they're $30, $40 million houses. And if they are rented out, there's lots of depreciation.
But the average house in the suburbs, you would still do a depreciation schedule.
Yeah. So if you've got, so let's say it's a 3-bedroom project home in Perth and it was built 10 years ago and it cost $230,000 to build that house 10 years ago. So if we strip out what the assets might have cost, the carpet and those things, let's say the building was $200,000 10 years ago. It's still going to depreciate at $5,000 per year because 2.5% of 200,000 is 5,000 per year. So it's going to be 5,000 per year for 30 years.
So at your average tax rate, that tax bracket of say 30%, then how much would you be claiming? You're getting back $2,000 per annum, really, from the tax man
every year.
Yeah,
and as I say, our document runs forever, so people don't have to come back to us every year, tragically, and pay us. We just produce a document that runs forever.
But I guess the benefit though is especially in a high rates environment, that's where having say $200 a month saving from your
Mm.
depreciation, if you're getting, let's say a property is negatively geared by $1,000 before tax, and then you depreciate it, that already cash flow improves by $200 every month.
Yeah, it can be the thing that flips a property,
Mm,
you know, into a much better tax territory.
for sure. And say hypothetically, someone's living in a property and it's their home, and then they're upgrading or moving, they're converting their current property into an investment
Mm.
property. Would you recommend they reach out and
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we do a lot of these. We do quite a few for from accountants for expats or people who are about to become expats. They're going to rent out their home and go overseas, or people who have taken jobs interstate. And it's always worth a call. People are often surprised because people think, oh, I built this house 20 years ago and I've lived there for all that time. How can there be anything to claim? And there will be, because it's, if they built it 20 years ago, it's still got 20 years left to run. And if they're doing work to the property immediately before renting it out, they claim that as well. It's not unusual for people to put new appliances in a property. Now, if they put brand new appliances in a property just as they're moving out,
yeah.
they get to claim depreciation on those brand new appliances.
Oh, and then question I have is, so someone buys an investment property and they need to do some cosmetic work like paint and carpets and blinds. So that will also form part of cost of the building, I understand, and claimed over 40 years. Would that be correct?
We're sort of, yeah, it's when we get into repairs and maintenance versus improvement, you could do a whole podcast on that. But if somebody buys a property, so let's say somebody buys a property and it's a bit run down. Um, and they buy the property, they get the keys, they go and look at the property. This is the first time they've seen it without the staged furniture, and they think, "Oh God, it's a bit ordinary. I need to paint it because it's just terrible." And they think that's okay. I can claim that as repair. They can't, because what they're doing is improving the property. So they claim and paint is 2.5% per annum, amazingly. Um, but if they also decide to put a brand new oven in and a brand new range hood and a brand new dishwasher and brand new carpets, all of that, they depreciate that stuff quite quickly.
Okay, because yeah, maybe it's just my misunderstanding that if you are a new owner of a property and you do some works, and it just forms part of the building cost rather than actual
Not
replacement
really.
value.
It's so the ATO call it initial repairs. Um, the misconception that a lot of people have is that initial repairs can be claimed as repairs, can be expensed,
Yeah,
because people buy a property and it's run down
yeah,
and they think, oh, I can't rent this out.
yeah.
I have to fix it. I've got to spend $20,000 repairing it. New doors and new bench tops, or they think that can be claimed as repairs
Yeah.
because they're repairing the property. But no, it gets claimed at
Understood.
2.5%. But it probably does get added to the cost base as well.
Yep, yep, yeah. I'm curious, you also mentioned that these can be backdated if someone doesn't know they can do a depreciation schedule. Does it mean they have to update all their tax returns for several years or?
Well, it does. So we can start a depreciation schedule at any time. We can start it today. We can start it last year. We can start it 10 years ago. It doesn't matter. We can start it on any date people request. If your tax returns are up to date, the ATO will let you amend 2 of them. It is possible for an accountant to get permission to go back further and amend more tax returns, but you have to amend each year's tax return and claim the deductions that were eligibly claimed in that year. So if you haven't claimed 2 years of depreciation, you don't just put it on this year's tax return. You have to go back and amend those previous ones. And it used to be 4 years. It used to be very, very easy to amend 4 years of depreciation. And that was changed because nobody ever seeks to amend a tax return if they don't think they're going to get money back.
Yeah.
So I think the government thought, oh, let's make it a little bit more difficult. Let's forget that 4-year thing. Let's make it 2 years.
Yeah, but
Uh,
but your accountant may be able to request.
yeah. I think accountants need to request permission to go back past 2 years, and there probably needs to be extenuating circumstances. Maybe they took over from an accountant that was remiss or something like that.
Yeah, I'm curious, Scott, are there any other like key questions that you get asked by investors, or are there any misconceptions investors have that you might want to share?
I think renovations are a big one. I think a lot of people don't realise, they think their house is old. They think it's too old. There's no depreciation to claim. It's a 1920s house. I'll just forget about it. They don't realise that there's depreciation in renovations. And we did one a couple of weeks ago, and it was and we ended up inspecting it, but we had a look online first. And it was a 1920s bungalow in Concord in Sydney. And that housing type was always single story. And this house had a second story. And I reckon it was done about 20 years ago and done very well. Done so well that it was hard to tell that it had been done. But I knew the housing style when I looked at it, and I knew that top was not original. So we sent somebody there. And I think we worked out that it cost about $280,000 to put that top on. So that client of ours that bought that property recently, that thought there was no depreciation in it, that came to us because their accountant said, "Oh, I think you should check this out." It was about $6,500 per year on that renovation. So that's a massive misconception. That or it's a huge loss.
So everyone should consider doing a depreciation once
Yeah, acquired.
even if the property was built prior to September 1987,
Yes.
the date.
Yes.
Even if it's done, it's worth asking, because the renovations the previous owner might have done might make you eligible for some depreciation.
And we can spot renovations really quickly. And sometimes we can spot them when we know that it's easy to cost them, and sometimes we'll need to go there. And the ones we like to inspect are the ones that are complicated. Old terrace houses, old Queenslanders. We've seen old, those beautiful Brisbane, or other cities on the coast, those beautiful timber Queenslanders.
Yeah.
We've looked at those and they've been renovated, and a lot of those are jacked up. So a lot of those Queenslanders are raised.
Yeah.
And for us, because I'm in Sydney, you're in Sydney, our houses tend to be brick. The whole idea of a house that somebody can put metal bars underneath and raise on jacks, to create a second floor underneath.
Yep.
The cost of doing that is huge. And not only that, sometimes those Queenslanders are jacked up and moved either to another location, or they're moved on the block to a more favourable location on the block so people can develop down the back or something. So you can look at a Queenslander and look at it from the outside and think, oh, that's a nicely restored Queenslander. But then you have a closer look and you look at the other houses beside it and you realise that there's been, $300,000 or $400,000 spent on that. So there's a lot of money that people can claim.
Well, thank you so much, Scott, for joining us today. It was a pleasure having you as part of our podcast, and really informative. So if anyone wants to reach out to yourself, then they need just to hop on depreciator.com.au.
Yeah, so depreciator.com.au is the website. My email address is scott@depreciator.com.au. I like answering emails.
Okay.
I do. They're a nice distraction.
Great.
So people email me all the time. They send me links to properties and ask what I think, or they got tricky questions, and I'm always happy to do that. Or they just call up and ask questions over the phone.
Excellent. Great. Thank you so much. Thanks, Scott.